Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I'm Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Paul R. Johnson, who serves as Vice President of People and Culture and Chief Diversity Officer of the Seattle Symphony. Paul, welcome to the show.
Good morning and hello, Aaron. Great to be here. Looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you. And obviously, the Seattle Symphony is one of our great creative partners of the show. But not only that, I've had the honor of being able to see the impact of the symphony up close. Sphinx has partnered with the symphony for many, many years. And obviously, many of our laureates have been featured as soloists. And so it's just a wonderful institution. So I'm so excited to talk to you, and especially all about diversity and initiatives and how that really, kind of materializes in orchestras, right? And so obviously many in our audience either are at orchestral institutions and or even at other academic or other institutions, but have an interest in kind of how you're tackling these issues, et cetera. So I thought I would kind of just start there with saying, are there any kind of key DEI initiatives, DEIB initiatives that you have or that you feel are most important that you're doing at the Seattle Symphony?
Yeah, well, for us, I mean, there's been great diversity work going on for a long time, DEIB. Long before I joined the symphony about 2 years ago. And one of the reasons I joined is because I saw the initiatives that our CEO and president was really looking to kind of shift the culture. I was really brought in to be the head of human resources, people and culture, just another way of saying human resources. And there was an intentional decision to kind of shift the name from human resources to people and culture because, people hear HR or personnel and they think very transactional, the person who hires, who fires, who works on benefits and insurance and things like that. And while, I am responsible for all of that, it was very intentional on behalf of our leadership and our board to make it about people and culture and about really changing, making a really a considered effort to shift the culture a little bit and really make it about diversity and inclusion. And while it wasn't initially called out when I initially took the job, there was a conversation about really we want to make this an environment and inclusive for everyone. And the way I've always looked at the work, I've done DEI work in other organizations, mostly in a corporate space. But coming here was definitely different and new for me. But I've always looked at it like typically DEIB doesn't own anything, but they have an opportunity to touch everything. And so, for us, when I think about our operations department, our artistic, marketing, development, all those key components you think about in an orchestra, I'm not the one who, DEI is not going to decide who goes on stage. They're not the ones who are going to decide how we market or sell tickets or how we raise money. But they have an opportunity to influence all of those departments and to hold them accountable. And so for me, a lot of my work has to do with partnering with those leaders. And again, it was really intentional to bring in someone doing this sort of work at a senior level or as part of the senior leadership team where you're at the table when those critical and important decisions are being made. And then I have an opportunity to partner, as I mentioned, with all of those department leaders when they're, developing their budgets at the beginning of the year and kind of, putting out their priorities. And so a lot of my work has to do with inserting and making sure that they're thinking about an inclusive way of approaching their jobs. And so that's, I would say in a nutshell, it's not one specific initiative, but we want it integrated in everything that we do.
So this is such important work, and I love how you kind of describe that in terms of how important the interconnected nature is. And I was kind of curious, right? Because you've done this work as you referenced for-profit sector. I think even Starbucks, Microsoft, right? So you've had this history, and I'm curious, do you find that there are either different or unique challenges in the orchestral slash nonprofit world versus the for-profit that either make this work more difficult, more challenging, or less challenging?
Yeah, there are definitely some differences, and I'm noticing I'm learning every day myself as I spend more time in the arts and sort of in the nonprofit space. But I think probably the biggest thing that comes to mind for me is the arts. There's really no ill intention. I mean, I think the everyone's heart's in the right place, and there's really goodwill. But I also think, as artists and creative people, a lot of times they're just so focused on their work and just getting the work done that there's not sort of that mindset of, I need to think about, do I have everyone at the table helping me to make these decisions? I'm just trying to do the best that I can. I just want the best, flute player. I just want the best, timpanist. It's we want blind auditions. All those things are really good because they almost have a sense of I don't want um, to be discriminatory in the way I approach it, but it's so focused that you sometimes lose sight of again, having more people at the table thinking about different ways of doing it. And then again, it's not always it's kind of not looking at the big picture. It's just I'm good at what I do. This is what I focus on. I'm really not thinking about the fact of why people aren't coming to our shows, and does it have anything to do with their background or accessibility, or where they live and whether somebody invited them. So again, I think it's more about helping people recognize their blind spots in a space like this. Where when I think about the corporate space, it's talked about a lot. There's a lot of funding for it. Typically, sometimes it's more again transactional because it's compliance. It's like we need to do this to make sure that we're not breaking any laws. And I think here you can see that sometimes, but not as much. I think people really, again, their intentions are genuine. They're good. It's just, again, sometimes there's blind spots.
Absolutely. And so here's something that's come up in some conversations I've had talking with people who are focused and or have a responsibility relating to DEI at their arts institution, say. Um, and and I love how you talked about how you're interfacing with someone who's leading marketing or leading programming or leading, maybe an audition committee or whatever it might be. But in talking with sometimes people who are charged with that responsibility of DEI in an institution, but feel a level of frustration of being able to get people in other departments to either care as much and or especially to act, right, to make change. And I'm just curious, have you found and or what have been the most effective ways that you found to impact others in the institution so that you're able to kind of right create that systemic change within the institution? Are there certain things you've identified that seem to really work that you could share with others who are who are watching?
Yeah, I mean, it's no, it's a great question, and I've definitely been in organizations where it's challenging because sometimes you get hired into a role leading diversity or inclusion, but you don't have any um, you don't have any leverage or power to really get anything done. You can kind of make suggestions, but people are like, okay, well, stay in your lane, you do all the work. But what I've learned, one, and I don't recommend that this would, or I don't suggest that this strategy or the way we're structured here would work for everyone. But one of the beauties in my role is that I do oversee human resources or, people and culture. And having both hats really works well for me because, people tend to think that human resources or people and culture does have a little bit of influence because you can hold people accountable. There's an element of performance management, when you're setting goals and having goals that you want departments to achieve. And when I have my HR hat on, I can sort of, influence that piece of it, but I can make sure that I integrate diversity and inclusion into those goals. So that helps. But even that alone isn't enough, because really, to your point, you want diversity to be systemic. And what I've seen in other organizations is sometimes you have really strong diversity initiatives, or when you have strong leaders in place. Our CEO and president, Krishna Tyagarajan, is a great advocate and proponent for DEIB, as am I. But I don't want a situation where it only works because he's here or because I'm here. The ideal situation is to, like you said, create systemic change so that it lives beyond individuals. And so it has to be integrated into the work. And so while that helps having, an HR leader or, these people who can kind of come around and hold people accountable, what I try to do is make sure that I try to replicate my efforts, and you're almost trying to create what you might call mini me's, because it would be impossible to do all this work by myself. And that's, I think, sometimes the, mistake organizations make. They expect to hire someone to do this work and they expect them to do it all. And they just can't. You really have to sort of, try to influence and change the way others do their work so that whether you're in the room or not, the work gets done. It's almost like when you're, working with young people and you're trying to get them to say thank you and please. And you feel like you have to remind them, but there's a beauty in seeing them do it, whether you provoke them to say it. There's no provocation. You don't have to, tell I have an 11-year-old, so he's at that age where it's like, that's so great when I see him just say thank you and please, and I don't have to remind him to do it. And it's the same thing, I think, with DEI work. You're really trying to get people to interview, to do auditions, to hire people as extras, all of those things, to write stories in our publications, without me having to say anything. But we do that. One of the things I'm really proud of over the past year is, we have started like DEIB training with our staff, our musicians, as well as our board members. And as you do those trainings, people's light bulbs come on. They can start doing those things, thinking about it again, recognizing their blind spots. But I'll just go with like 3 tips that I kind of, try to do in organizations when I get in terms of building support. Is I want to make sure I have the ear or buy-in from other leaders, senior leaders, and my board chair, all of those key people, because it would really be impossible to get a lot of the work done without those stakeholders. You want everyone kind of using shared understanding of what you're trying to do when it comes to DEIB, and you want them using similar language when they're talking about it. So you don't want to be the only one talking about this. So I really try to, again, build in advocates, and particularly in leadership. The other thing I try to do is again, I mentioned replicate myself as a change agent. Begin shifting the way other leaders think and the way they approach their work. And that helps with, I think, systemic change. And then lastly, I would also recommend just having a network of other practitioners that meet with on a regular basis, people doing similar work in other organizations. I've had an opportunity to meet regularly with other DEI leaders from various symphonies from across the country. We get together at events like the Sphinx Conference, Sphinx Connect, and the League of American Orchestras. We come together. So I have friends within that organization. So I don't think the work has to be about recreating the wheel. Sometimes you can really learn from those others and just roll them out as best practices in your organization. And I also network locally with other arts organizations in the Seattle area. So having those, I think, 3 components really help.
Absolutely. Well, it's extraordinary work that you are doing. And thank you so much for sharing, because I think so many of those, including those 3 action and kind of 3 aspects of approach, are so important and will be valuable to many in our audience. So unfortunately, we are just about out of time, but I always like to ask of all of my guests This work, especially work in DEIB, can sometimes be challenging. There can sometimes seem like there's, obstacles that are difficult even to overcome. Just curious, as an arts leader, do you have any kind of approach or mechanism that you use during kind of the toughest of times as an administrative leader?
Yeah, for me, I definitely, I think we all get frustrated to the point I made a moment ago about having that network of individuals that you can go to, because sometimes you do feel like you're on an island and you feel like you're doing the work by yourself and that people don't understand what you're going through. So I think having those others at other symphonies and other arts organizations that you can bounce ideas off of and talk to really helps. But for me too, it's just sometimes listening to the music, getting inspiration from sitting in the symphony hall and listening to music, and really, building your inspiration, because music does inspire me that way.
Paul R. Johnson, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for all of your work that you are doing, and thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it.